116 fantasy writers have sent me their magic system ideas, and in this video I'll pick the best one to win $1,000 along with a 1-hour coaching call with myself. For our first round we have Eric versus Kelly.
A girl stands outside in a hurricane. She waits for the angel that rides the wind, and when it finds her, they wrestle in a spiritual plane. Far away, a boy cautiously approaches a pack of wolves. The young man wrestles the angel of the wolves because he knows that if he wins, he will gain their sense of smell. If the girl wins, she will gain the wind, and the angel in the form of an animal will join her thereafter.
So we've got this magic system based around kind of wrestling angels, which is this, classic biblical metaphor, but it's kind of used here as a way that you can deploy to gain certain new skills.
In our world, the magic system is based on a symbiotic relationship between a wielder, someone who can manipulate magic but has no natural access to it, and a conduit, someone who can access magic but cannot manipulate it.
I really like this. I think there's a lot of potential there for some cool conflict and a lot of tension between characters. Man, this is so hard to tell between Eric or Kelly, which one is going to move on. But I think, as much as I do like the angel bonding thing, I am going to have to pick Kelly to move on, just because the story conflict possibilities of this sort of dual class magic system are really exciting to me.
So there's 7 sins and 7 virtues like wrath and patience, constantly warring for power. They choose a human that embodies them and makes them advents, basically powerful demigods. At the same time, they create a city to appear wherever their advent is chosen. The twist is the city falls from the sky.
So you have humans basically becoming the avatars of wrath, envy, sloth, lust, all of the other 7 deadly sins. I'm interested to see how this sort of cities manifesting and then falling down works out. That seems like it was just sort of thrown in there at the end, but it's an interesting idea. Maybe later on, if he gets through this round, he'll be able to explore that idea in a little bit more depth.
Each and every person has the choice to borrow the devil's power. Whether it be for but a moment or permanently, the question remains the same. What will it want from you?
I like the sense that you can maybe make a bargain to have power for only a few seconds, or you can have power for perhaps a few years even, maybe even a few decades. And then the sort of consequences that are inherent to this are really interesting too. I think that's often something I really like to look for with a magic system, is how interesting are the consequences and how can they sort of generate story conflict. So, picking between Jay and Grayson. Man, these again are both very, very strong. I like them both here, but I think I'm gonna have to pick Jay to go through. Also, we've only looked at 4 magic systems so far, but personally, I think these ideas have been really fascinating and really sort of narratively inspiring. So I'm really excited to see what's ahead of us. Like I said before, we've had literally 116 writers who have sent through their magic system ideas. And while I'm not gonna show them all in this video, because we just don't have time, quite frankly, I think that as a fantasy writer, if you're watching this video, you're gonna get a lot of inspiration by the end of this. So let's continue on.
The law of conservation of magic dictates that power can neither be created nor destroyed. Rather, it remains constant throughout time. Drawing outside of fated boundaries will have disastrous consequences. For in a world that thrives on balance, one cannot take without forcing another to give.
Feels like a really good establishment of conflict and of consequences to this magic system here. And I'm very intrigued by this idea of magic that has a fixed quantity throughout all of time. So presumably, if you use up a certain amount of it in the current era, then that means in the future you can no longer use it.
Inkvial is a tattoo or ink-based magic system where the potency of the magic that can be used is half dependent on the tattoos gotten upon turn of legal age and half dependent on how well they are understood.
The ability to completely remove away your fear and harness it into a weapon. However, building this armament will bring that terror back tenfold.
Okay, cool. So this is a fear-based magic system where your sort of perceptions of your level of terror or anxiety or horror within a certain situation appear to influence the degree of magical strength you have. That's quite interesting.
The Book of Scribes is an artifact in which one can record events happening to a person as they happen, but also erase them, transferring the effects of that event from that person to the one who erased it instead.
2 strong entrants here. So we got the Book of Scribes and then we have this sort of fear-based magic system. Man, both of these are quite competitive entries. I mean, I'm a sucker for stories that deal with fate or destiny, so I think I'm gonna have to put Nathaniel's Book of Scribes through.
My magic system is called Nemancy. It uses memories and experiences to fuel the spell, cast the spell, instead of saying a spell book or a wand or runes or what have you.
This is an interesting way to differentiate and make your magic system feel unique, is to come up with an interesting fuel for it. Oftentimes the fuel is simply someone's energy, or perhaps there's some sort of liquid substance that they drink or something like that. But I really like Alan's concept here of using your own memories. It brings up a lot of interesting possibilities around what happens to those memories when used magic. Do they disappear? Do they kind of change? Do they evolve in these dangerous ways? So I'm going to put Alan's through to the next round.
Inspired by trading card games, this magic system was born in a world where creatures and monsters run rampant. Human technology have finally found a way to tame these creatures through the creation of magical cards, bringing in forth a new age of humankind.
I grew up loving Pokemon, so Owen's concept here is kind of really hitting me nostalgia button. But I love this concept of card-based magic used to control monsters within the world, and I think it offers up some rich narrative possibilities, and I think it really does sort of touch upon that Pokemon idea, but maybe in a more mature, more adult sense. Interested to hear where this one goes.
Magic is self-actualization incarnate. Inept mages can't control how spells will manifest, for they're molded by desire and psyche. Anything is possible, but spells will never defy the beliefs you hold true. Do you know yourself well enough to become immortal?
This one is quite narratively interesting because you could have a character who perhaps begins the story as quite powerful and confident in their own abilities, and they're in this virtuous cycle where because they're confident in their abilities, they have great power, and because they have great power, they have very confident abilities. But then perhaps you could have an antagonist who, while not outwardly that powerful or maybe doesn't even have magic, they could plant seeds of doubt within a character's mind, or even, sort of gaslight them to make them believe they're losing some of their competence. And then that would feed into this negative feedback loop that slowly erodes and destroys their magical capabilities. So, Sarah, this is a very interesting concept. You're probably getting this as a constant theme. I've really found the magic systems that have been the most interesting to me so far, and we've only gone through the first 26 of them, have really been the ones that just get my mind racing off into all these different storytelling directions. And the magic systems that are really appealing to me at this moment are the ones where you can instantly see how that translates to a gripping narrative, or this really cool plot twist, or this great character arc, or this interesting moment within a story.
Upon the death of ancient beings, the soil was infused with their power. Now long gone, a portion of their power can be manifest through certain plants that grow on their soil. One soil gives plants the power of prophecy, while another lets the plants manipulate heat, creating fire and ice.
This is cool, like this intersection of very place-specific magic where the plants have to grow in a very specific location on specific soil in order to gain abilities. And then also a really interesting, deep, rich sense of history and lore here. This idea that the soil kind of has the blood of the ancients, or it's sort of got the remnants of their spirits within it.
Okay, hear me out. A magic system powered entirely off of religion, where a pantheon of gods interfere on Earth to further their own desires, and they do this, get this, by way of prophetic dreams, holy bloodlines, and ancient weapons with supernatural properties.
Bro, I'm in. As soon as you get a blackboard up and you start drawing out your ideas like this guy has, nice work, Jacob. You're a really strong contender.
Heartbeats are patterns of being. Every person is always holding a heartbeat. When two or more people hold the same heartbeat close together, mimetic beings called rhythms can form. These rhythms can influence the people that they're born from.
I really like this idea. That's a cool one, Ethan.
You've been possessed by the god of yesterdays and tomorrows. And now, whenever you touch someone's skin, you live their whole life from beginning to end, including every possible future.
Great pitch, Anthony. I love how direct you are from the start there. You are possessed by a time god. That's really interesting to me, this idea of someone who is going to be cursed to live out these other people's experiences and very quickly understand their lives. I can see this leading to a really interesting story about maybe a detective type character. I'll be very curious to see where this leads later in the contest.
Veritekemi is a process in which people ferment and break down materials or objects inside of the functioning stomachs of dead ancient beasts. This produces a drinkable/injectable liquid that grants them the ability to transform reality or themselves based on that material.
That's so off the wall. I don't think I've seen anything like that yet. So points for originality, Eric.
My entry is a soft magic system called the Lay, which consists of an invisible, natural magical reality that is molded by human use and perception thereof. So it mirrors the political realities and structures of society.
This is a pretty cool concept by Will here. This idea of a softer magic system. A lot of the entries so far have been harder, and that's probably because in the past I've expressed my preference for that as well. But it seems like this is an interesting concept here. This idea of perception really influencing reality and influencing this sort of undercurrent magic that leads through this fantasy world that Will is describing here.
Hi, my name is Jan Victor Havel, and my magic system, La Crematurgy, is set in a black and white world where people cry colors. These colors don't dry and can be stored for later magical use.
A black and white world and you cry colors. Like, I'm extremely intrigued and hooked by that. That's very interesting. Are the most powerful people in this world those who are actors, basically? The people who can, on command, generate tears and generate emotions to cry this colorful magical essence? This is a really cool concept. Okay, round one is over and we've gone from 116 riders down to just 58. And as a reminder, only one of these will be winning the $1,000 prize along with a 1-hour coaching call with myself. Before we get into round two, I want to run through all the names that we've had so far for the magic systems and pick my favorite one. So as you probably noticed, I've changed my shirt. This is day 2 of recording this video because there have been so many entrants to go through. So let's have another look through the names and I'm going to pick my favorite one so far. Honestly, there's a lot of great names here, but if I had to pick my absolute favorite one so far, I would probably pick Rithmare by Isaac. There's just something about that name that feels so magical and so evocative and mysterious. And of course, the name is just one aspect of designing a cool magic system, but I think Isaac's Rithmare has the coolest name for me so far. Now it's time to move into round 2 of our contest, where once again, we'll be pitting our riders against each other with their 15-second pitches. And then the winners for this round will go into round 3, where they will have more time to describe their magic system to me. Let's get to it.
I have a spiritual magic system that's based on a relationship with the eternal flame, that without it would just be a normal fire, but when you know it, it will guide you in ways that you've never been guided and illuminate things with its light that you've never seen before. And that is my magic system.
My magic system is called Nemency. It uses memories and experiences to fuel the spell, cast the spell.
These are both two really strong entrants. I think now that we're getting further into the contest, it's going to be harder and harder for me to kind of separate these as we move forward. So on one hand, we've got this sort of memory-based magic system, and then we've got this sort of spiritual fire-based magic system. I think I'm leaning towards the memory-based one. I think there's some interesting possibilities there. So I would like to see how that progresses in later rounds.
Inspired by trading card games, this magic system was born in a world where creatures and monsters run rampant. Human technology have finally found a way to tame these creatures through the creation of magical cards, bringing in forth a new age of humankind.
Magic is self-actualization incarnate. Inept mages can't control how spells will manifest, for they're molded by desire and psyche. Anything is possible, but spells will never defy the beliefs you hold true. Do you know yourself well enough to become immortal?
Man, this is so hard to pick between the two. I think I just really want to see that card-based magic system progress forward. I'm really curious to kind of see the details of that.
Sacrificial magic in my universe is powered by different gods that want various things from people whether they know it or not. One can make a wish that will come true and they won't know the consequences until it's much too late, or someone may very well know the grave cost to do something grand.
The magic system is based on contracts with demons, devils, and familiars. These contracts have limitations and requirements before the user can start using the magic from the demon. The higher restrictions and requirements, the stronger the magic outcome is.
This is an interesting common theme that's come up. I'd say one of the most common magic systems I've seen in this contest is a sort of demon-based magic, where it's either deals with the devil or you sort of personify these different demons or sins or gods out there. And it's interesting how that's a very common theme. These are both very strong, but I think I prefer the first one just based on the sort of unreliableness of it. The fact that you can make these wishes that come true and you don't really know the consequences or the costs for it until later on. That's quite interesting to me. But these are both, again, very strong entrants.
My main character enrolls in a super soldier program that gives him a mysterious cranial computer and nanobots that together reforge his body over time to make him better, stronger, faster than before. These improvements eventually give him an opportunity to use alien power armor. But is that worth the sacrifices?
So the entire magic system of my universe, the sequence of silver clouds, originates from the remnants of a celestial body. When the star fell and shattered, fate intervened and turned these fragments into magical artifacts and beings known as holy items and guardians.
I love a good backstory to a magic system. I think that's always something that enriches it as well. And a big common theme I've seen with a lot of the successful entries is even within the 15 seconds, they are suggesting interesting lore and history within their fantasy world that grounds the magic system and justifies it and makes me believe in it to a greater degree. Round 2 is over. We're about to move into round 3 with our remaining 29 riders. But before we move into round 3, where we'll hear some longer pitches from our contestants and go a bit deeper and get some more development in their magic systems, I thought I would go through and just pick the 3 contestants that are currently standing out the most to me with their magic. So those 3 contestants, the first one I would say is Owen with his card sealing magic. The second is Eric with his Veridichemy magic system here. And then the third is Jan with his Lacrimaturgy magic system. Let's see how these riders fare as we move into round 3. Welcome to round 3 of the competition. We are now down to 29 riders, and in this round they have slightly longer to describe their magic systems to me. They have up to 90 seconds in this round. But only 8 of them will be moving on into round 4. And given the quality of riders we've seen so far and the quality of ideas that have reached this point in the competition, I think it's going to be really tough for me to kind of separate the final 8 from the 29 riders that we have at the moment. But I'm very interested to see how some of these ideas, which I've only heard in the 15-second version so far, get fleshed out into these longer, more involved summaries. So let's get to it. Okay, I've watched through all of the riders' 90-second long presentations. So from the 29 riders in round 3, I can only select 8 to move forward into the next round, round 4. And it was really, really tough to do this. I think all of the contestants were very, very strong by this stage of the competition. But I finally decided on the 8 riders who will be moving forward into round 4. And I'm about to go through those 8 riders and also play their longer pitches for you. And while I go through that process, I'll be reacting to the parts of their magic system that seem the most interesting or the most compelling to me as I go through this. First, we have Alan with Nemency.
The magic users are called Nemancers. They use memory and experience to fuel their craft, to shape their spells and cast their spells. The type of memory and experience and the strength of the memory and experience also play a part. To give you an example, if you were to do something small like ignite a candle or lift a cup, you would use a small memory, something insignificant like what you had for breakfast at home. If you wanted to do something heavier, something more significant like lift an entire horse, you would use a stronger memory, for instance, your first kiss.
I really like this concept of using different degrees of memories to produce different magical results. And I can think about how that's going to lead to some really interesting moments within the story. And again, it's just really bringing in this interesting sense of conflict and stakes and real consequences for using the magic.
In order to trap these creatures in the cards, they have to be killed first, and once they are killed, you can trap these creatures into the cards and summon them for your own bidding.
So I really like that as a way to kind of trigger the magic. That was something I was wondering from the 15-second pitch is how do you actually get the monsters and the creatures into the cards? But the simple limitation of you have to kill this creature before you can create a card of it is quite good.
The basic premise of this magic system is control, and the philosophical question behind this is what if you give someone the ability and power to control anything they can? The most basic plot line is to turn fantastical beasts and creatures into a commodity or resource using this magic system, and so you can have entire kingdoms and wars resulting from this to turn it into an epic fantasy story. You can have story quests of warriors trying to slay a great dragon or legendary beast to later use them for war like weapons of mass destruction.
That's really cool. A lot of good story possibility here.
Or you can have another story where someone was able to invent a version of these cards that works with another human being. And then suddenly the story turns into a deception, spy, political story where you can't be sure whether the other party is a real human or is a dead person being controlled by the opposition.
Honestly, that's a more interesting direction to me. The idea of this sort of spy fantasy thriller where you can slaughter people and then turn them into a card you control, that's really fascinating.
Speaking of dead people, what if there was a version of these cards that were able to capture the undead? And then you can have a horror mystery thriller story where someone used these to terrorize another person to their death, and it's up to the protagonist to find out who, what, or why.
Next we have Aaron with his plant and soil-based magic system.
Long ago, there were powerful beings who roamed the earth, each possessing a unique ability. Many of these beings hunted humans, but one had the gift of prophecy and saw what the humans would someday become and fought to protect them. A war ensued, and eventually all of these beings perished. At the places of their death, their magical gifts were infused in the soil, giving plants certain powers relating to their gift.
I really like this backstory and how the history and the lore of this world is feeding into the magic system. We've actually had quite a few good entrants who did this well, who really made the magic feel not just like this cool combination of powers that came out of nowhere, but they instead made it feel like a natural result of the world building and the history of this fantasy world, sometimes going back, to thousands of years before the events of the story.
Over time, many of these sites were turned into temples or gardens where magical plants are bred and cultivated.
Again, this is really cool how we're now going from this sort of big world building history, the big lore of this world, down to something a bit more granular, like there's a temple here and this temple was built over this sacred site where this ancient god or this ancient being died.
At each burial site, there are only a handful of plants that become imbued, and many plants can't grow there at all. However, of the plants that do, each variety has different properties. For example, each prophecy fruit will let the consumer see the future, but each variant shows different aspects of the future and even conveys that information in different forms, such as visions, words, and even smells.
This is something that, for me, always elevates a magic system. That is, rather than just giving you the power, it gives you power, but with these limitations or with a certain amount of unreliability.
In the city of fire and ice, the fruit can manipulate heat, leading to some plants that can get cold and others hot, with most potent being perpetually covered in ice or fire. This effect happens without ingesting the plant, so most choose not to, since eating burning plants is not entirely safe. This leads to striking scenery around the site of the magical effect and makes harvesting some plants quite difficult.
It's really important to think about the visual nature of your magic and how can this magic lead to interesting and arresting visual moments or sights within the context of your story.
In my fantasy universe, magic was created by a divine creator and is intrinsically good, but is not meant to be used by mortal beings. Mortals have since found a way to rebel and wield this magic by drawing power from the stars, giving them the ability to manipulate realities on the physical and metaphysical plane.
I love the sense of magic being this forbidden art. That's quite interesting to me and very fascinating possibilities for conflict within a story.
Unaware that they are actually invoking evil spirits called Sefarius through these practices.
Again, a really good sense of consequences and stakes for using the magic.
The longer they abuse magic, the faster the person loses feeling in their hands and they begin to take on the appearance of a Sefarius themselves. In order to save humanity, the creator has gifted a select few to wield what's called an inner star, a piece of the creator's soul that indwells in a person, enabling them to wield a pure, unadulterated power within the confines of the creator's morality. A star weaver must memorize the constellations and trace the proper pattern onto their hand, into the air, or on another person or object.
There's a clear sense of progression here where you can actually learn this magic through memorization, through being gifted with memory, or through good study, or I presume even through having some of these patterns actually, maybe written down or something like that. And again, there's a nice visual component to how this magic is operating. I can imagine the scenes describing these glowing lines of light being carved on someone's hand or in the air or on an object could be really interesting to read. So that's the first 4 writers into our final 8, and we only have 4 more spots remaining. So let's get to the next one. And that is Jacob with the blood right of the 12 gods.
So there's a pantheon of 12 gods. When these 12 gods created the world my story is based in, they each created a man and a woman with their own blood to populate the world. If this reminds you of the story of Adam and Eve, that's actually intentional. In fact, this whole concept of magic through the religion takes the influence of real-life world religions, and it uses these real-life...
I love the maps and the blackboard here, just like these little bits of supplemental implementation really make me feel like this world is quite fleshed out and that the magic system has a lot of depth to it.
Influences to ground the reader in a story that they can relate to. Let's learn more about these holy weapons by way of our example here. God ate Parthenos. She had 1 female and 1 male descendant. And unto these descendants she bestowed a spear called Thyrsis, has the power to mold earth and stone. Over generations, these two multiplied. So now anyone who is descendant of these two can use the powers of Thyrsis.
That's cool. Okay, so you've got these different holy weapons and these different sort of bloodlines of gods, and they lead to unique powers within their descendants. This is quite interesting, and it's something that could lead to a good source of conflict within the story, as perhaps these different lines of descendants maybe are allied with other gods' descendants or are rivals against some other gods as well.
A holy weapon's power can only be used by one person at a time.
Oh, that's a good limitation. So this isn't something where you can just have armies of people rushing in with these spears that control Earth, but it's something that can only be allocated to one person, which again immediately brings up this very fascinating question of who is going to be in charge.
And can't be bound to a new person until the last member has died.
That's really good.
Kingdoms in my world had implemented a clear line of succession because of this, and that whoever is king is the one entrusted with wielding their holy weapon. I designed things.
Great, so now we've got this interesting magical system limitation feeding into an aspect of the world building that feels logical and coherent and also leads to a lot of potential story conflict.
This way to actually help justify why the same set of 12 kingdoms have existed for so long. Because each ruler has such powerful force, and it's clear that their descendants will have that same power, it ensures the kingdom will stay as a unitary force. I know what you're thinking. That's all well and good, but that makes for a pretty stagnant system and story, right? Well, yes and no. I wanted a very simple way of understanding what in this world holds magical properties and why. I also wanted there to be room for miracles and unpredictable moments that can shake the reader's understanding on the nature of gods and men. Although these kingdoms have existed since the beginning, that's not to say that they're without turmoil. turmoil. And in fact, the focus on blood connects politics and family so tightly that any political happening in the world is going to have direct influences on the character.
Next, we have Ethan's heartbeat-based magic system.
So a heartbeat is the way that people will often pick a role to act out in society, but be able to change depending on who it is that they're interacting with. Some people are very good at changing their heartbeat when it's appropriate. Some people are not good at this. Holding a specific heartbeat will always have trade-offs. For instance, someone holding a friendly, trusting heartbeat will make themselves welcome wherever they go. They're very pleasant to be around.
That's particularly interesting because maybe you do try to hold that specific heartbeat to be pleasant and to be welcome wherever you go. But then if you get nervous walking into a new situation, or you're a spy and you're trying to infiltrate some place, the heartbeat could quite easily change. So there's some good room for tension and suspense there.
But they can be easily influenced and taken advantage of. Some people with the intention of influencing others will develop specific heartbeats so that they can perform around those people. This can be used for intimidation, this can be used for seduction, this can be used to get something from someone.
A lot of interesting possibilities with this, and I love the sense of trade-offs here.
Now, when lots of people hold the same heartbeat and focus together, mimetic beings called rhythms can form.
That's cool. Okay, so you've got a magic system that is not only interesting at a solo level, but there's also interesting dynamics that come into play once groups are involved and once there is synergy between different people.
They manifest as shimmery clouds. They feel very, very good to be a part of.
That's actually something that hasn't been touched upon with many of the magic systems today, is what does it actually feel like to use it, and what is that emotional experience like?
And they give people the power to pursue a goal. They're also encourage behavior that promotes them. This can often take the form of singing. So you can imagine groups singing together with clouds glowing around them as they move towards a goal.
For our second last entrant into round 4, we have Will with his soft magic system, The Lay of Things.
The lay is an analogical representation of political power structures and power relations. But more than anything, I'm focused on the presentational demonstrations of power, the way that monuments and pageantry can generate public perception and acceptance of power, power's aesthetics or artifice.
This is really cool. I like the fact that he started here with this clear inspiration, perhaps inspired by looking at some monuments or statues of rulers and thinking about the ways in which that influences public perception within our world, and then how that could influence a sort of magical reality or this underlying magical power within his fantasy world.
In my story, an evil empire called the Twofold Land has, over the course of centuries, made war on surrounding peoples and stolen their gods, using the lay to bind them to its will.
That's a cool world-building detail. I really like that.
These gods engage in ceremonies and public displays of subservience, both to cement the loyalty of these new subjects, but also changing the shape of the lay itself.
Immediately I'm thinking like public executions or these demonstrations of power. Maybe you put one of these rulers in like a gladiator-style arena and beats up a bunch of people to establish a dominance.
Now, accordingly, the greatest power is afforded to those mystics serving the emperor, and those who don't are forced to cultivate the meager and unpredictable wild magics outside the structure. But this story is set in a time of flux when the imperial state still holds a commanding influence over the lay, but now it is questioned.
Often I think when we're world-building fantasy stories, we tend to think of it as like this unchanging thing, like here is the world building, here is the story, here is the society. But what I like about this concept here is that he has acknowledged the truth, which is that things are always changing, things are always in flux, empires rise, empires fall. And then our final entrant into round 4 is Jan with his lacrimaturgy magic system.
Liturgy comes from the Latin word lacrima, meaning tear. In my world, which is black and white, people cry colors.
Again, just love the idea of a fantasy world that is all black and white and people crying colors. Like, that's just such an arresting and visually interesting image.
These colors have different properties. Each color has its own sphere of influence. So, green color controls space, yellow controls time, blue controls the mind, red controls matter, etc., etc. These colors don't dry, so we can store them forever, and they don't mix, because each color has its own consistency.
This is a good example of how you can use real-world physics to ground the magic systems in a sense of realism.
And the use is infinite. You can water a tree so it gives color for magical fruits. You can use it as a lubricant on a blade to make it sharper.
Immediately I'm thinking about like, okay, what if there's a sword and for centuries or millennia people have been weeping and crying over this sword to make it really strong and purifying the steel. The potentials of that are very fascinating to see. In a moment we're about to move on to the final round where our last 8 writers will go head to head and pitch me story scenes that use their magic. And the winner will be receiving $1,000 along with a 1-hour coaching call with myself. Now, if you're also a fantasy writer who would like my help to improve your storytelling and level up your craft, then you might want to apply for my 6-week fantasy outlining bootcamp. I've been writing fantasy novels for over a decade, and outlining, the ability to plan and effectively structure your plot and your character arcs out before you begin writing, is perhaps the most essential part of my process and the most useful tool I've discovered in my journey. Because it's one thing to come up with a cool magic system or interesting world building for your fantasy novel, but then figuring out how you actually integrate that with your story's plot and the character arcs and suspense and all the other components of an effective fantasy story is a really nuanced and difficult to learn skill. And in my experience, outlining is the thing that allows me to weave together all the different components of a fantasy story to produce a really entertaining and enjoyable novel. And this is why I'm launching this 6-week group coaching program that will share everything I know about outlining fantasy novels. Inside the bootcamp, you'll attend live workshops where you'll master the principles of story structure, character arcs, and world building that I've used to publish 3 fantasy novels and a video game. You'll also join me in a series of live group coaching calls where I'll personally coach you through the process of developing your own outline for your own fantasy novel, and in the process, really level up and accelerate your learning and development as a writer. And along the way, you'll work alongside a small group of like-minded fantasy writers, giving each other feedback and accountability as you go through the process. To make sure you get a ton of my personalized attention and feedback and help on your own outline, I'm limiting it to a maximum of 8 writers. So if this sounds like something that's going to help improve your storytelling, you can apply by going to jedherne.com/outline. The link is also in the description down below. Applications close on October the 2nd and the program kicks off on October the 16th. So if you're watching this after that date, feel free to go to that page and you might be able to sign up for the waitlist for future cohorts. And now onto the final round to see who out of these 116 writers we started with is going to walk away with that $1,000 prize.
One of the scenes in my story, the character's in a burning room, and there's a trapdoor. There's a trapdoor there. That's his only way to freedom, but he cannot lift it with his bare hands. He needs to use his gift to lift it, and he ends up picking a memory of the time he nearly drowned. Now, the whole thing about Nemancy is when you use the memories to fuel your craft, you relive those memories in real time.
That's a cool detail. I like that.
He's got the 2 different experiences playing off against each other. He's got the heat and the ash and the smoke and the fire, but at the same time, he's also feeling the cold, dark, salty water filling his lungs.
The visceralness of it, the immersiveness of that scene, and that potential to create this weird dreamlike state where you're going between the fire and the drowning, that's really interesting and evocative from a storytelling perspective.
So I was quite intrigued by my third idea of using this magic system for a horror fantasy story. I'm imagining a group of estranged friends that met up after decades again because their common mutual friend is found dead in her own place. They met up in a funeral and each one of them confesses their regrets. Then each one of them starts to get haunted by the dead ghost of their mutual friend into spilling their secrets and regrets before murdering them.
That's a cool setup. I'm intrigued.
Clues and evidence in the crime scene suggest to the protagonist that it's not a vengeful ghost spirit, but rather a spirit controlled by the antagonist or culprit with a motive using the magic system. So the idea that the magic system is the tool for the crime is the big plot twist in the story.
That's cool. So we've got this murder mystery where you're able to have the victim of the murder mystery being an active participant.
Vandar stepped up to the pedestal, the withered priest standing over him with the fruit of prophecy. Remember, child, the visions can sometimes be a little unsettling, but they just show a possibility. Let it guide you, but don't let it rule you. Are you prepared? Vandar nodded more resolutely than he felt. He was sure the priest's words were meant to be comforting, but they weren't. He held the fruit tentatively as he settled back on the cushion provided. With trepidation, he raised the fruit to his mouth. It smelled sweet. As he sunk his teeth into the flesh, sweet and slightly bitter juices flooded his mouth. At first, nothing happened. He looked down at the fruit. The juices that leaked from it were red. He felt a moment of horror before being swept into a vision. Fire and ice rained around him. Men in ice, blue, and fire-red uniforms stood in ranks, throwing fire fruits and wielding weapons of fire and ice. Nearby, there were immolators blazing like human bonfires, charging into ranks of the army of the Prophet King. Next to him stood 3 improbable strangers, a soldier, a sniffer, and a fashion seer. In the vision, he knew them, though he could not say their names. This vision lasted only a moment, but the vivid dream was branded into his mind as a snapshot of a possible future. He awoke on the cushion, not a possible future, he thought, looking at the blood-red juice on his hands, an omen of certain death. I am so sorry, the priest said when he noticed Vandar was aware of his surroundings. I have only personally seen one other red vision. You must be terrified.
Say there's a scene where my character Alistair is foolishly wandering the forest at night. He is then attacked from behind by a wizard, who has drawn a constellation pattern in the air to invoke an intense fire. Alistair stands his ground, and the inner star shines from within him, casting a shield around him that the fire can't penetrate. The flames continue to blaze, and Alistair is beginning to feel afraid, but resists the temptation to star-weave a spell to disperse the fire or summon water.
I like the idea that he's having to resist the temptation to use the spell. Again, one of the interesting aspects of this magic system was consequences of using it turns you into this sort of demonic creature.
He only has a little bit of power left, and chooses to trust the creator for a solution. In a moment of supernatural insight, Alistair realizes the true name of the Cepharius granting this wizard power, and commands it to leave, interrupting the wizard's spell and giving my character an opening of escape.
I think because this scene is largely resolved by this lucky thought from a character, it does feel a little bit Deus Ex Machina-ish, if I'm even pronouncing that right. What I mean to say is that it feels a little bit like the character just escaped through fortune rather than skill, necessarily.
The moment Pavel laid his hand on the spear, an infinite amount of images came pouring into his mind. Dragons, great battles, 2 women kissing, a man raising off his feet in a pillar of flame. Then he saw a quiet forest, a glass of wine shared with a friend, a story read in front of a fire. It all came to him in an instant. I'm going to die tomorrow, he heard a man say. Parthenos told me as such. Tell Alexander that I love him. Another flash of images, all at once. A gray sky, a green dragon, blood on steel, a golden arrow, and then another, both after and before the first. A child holding its mother, the bottom of a river, the top of a mountain. Then there were faces, 1,000 or more, resurged from the annals of history as if to greet their coming prophet. Some wore crowns, others linens over their eyes. Then the sounds came. All around, all consuming, all at once, crying, singing, laughter, screaming, dying, breathing, talking, seething. Come, a young man said, come to bed. Parthenos demands I must have another child. With me, a woman's voice spoke. Pavel couldn't see her, only light and birds and a bear feasting on the corpse. I've never even prayed before. I think that's why she's chosen you. Then the woman became dust, and the man bone, and soon his bones became dust, and from that dust grew a child. That child grew, and met a woman, and became dust. And from his dust came 3 more children, each returning from whence they came, leaving dozens in their place. And so it went on thrice more, and finally Pavel saw the face of his father, a face he had not seen since the war began. Painful fate, he heard his father say. The man's skin began to peel and flake off, and under it, Pavel could see the face of Timotei, his friend, Timotei. Heed my warning, he said. Painful fate. The sound of screaming overtook all others. Bears roared, birds flapped away, babes mewled as their mothers and fathers turned to soot. Soon everything had gathered in one pile of gray ash, and all the sounds ceased. Pavel felt a hand on his shoulder. Pavel? He heard Theodora call. Pavel, are you all right? All he could see then was the back of his hand, resting upon the cool metal of the spear. Pavel, why aren't you saying anything? Are you okay? I'm fine, Pavel heard himself say. He felt tired after the whole affair. He half wanted to fall over and let Theodora carry him to bed.
This is a really great quality of writing here. I feel super immersed in the story. I think the magic system is perhaps a little bit incidental to this example here. It feels like this is more just this really interesting prophecy scene around it, but the writing and the construction of it is very good. So if the magic is something that is allowing this level of storytelling to occur and it's leading to these interesting moments of prophecy and understanding about the world's lore, I think that is a real credit to Jacob's strength here as a writer.
So a famous speaker has announced that they're giving a talk in this town that the main character happens to be in. And the main character decides to go ahead and attend, just to see what this person has to say. There's a lot of tension in the land at this time, and the speaker has announced that they're talking about some of the more sensitive subjects. And when the main character gets there, the throngs of people are just kind of milling about. But when the speaker gets up and starts speaking, everyone in the group collectively agrees that he's making some good points.
I sense subterfuge at play.
No, he seems to have a really strong reaction to the problems in the land, but he is right about all the things that he's saying. And slowly, the whole group of audience starts to get angry together.
This is cool. So you've got this kind of like very charismatic public speaker who's using this heartbeat magic to influence the crowd.
They feel this righteous indignation flaring up, and all around them, these sparkles start to form until it becomes almost opaque in this like swirling, shimmering cloud of a rhythm. The main character is swept right along with this, and it gets to the point where everyone just feels so invigorated that they start thrashing the place that they are inhabiting at this moment.
Good escalation of tension here, good escalation of conflict. I like this.
It gets out of hand and spills out out of the building that they're in into the community at large and causes actual chaos. A riot forms. And it's not until he gets smacked in the head, the main character realizes he has to get out of there.
Very solid pitch from Ethan there. I will say, it's not trying to stretch for any massive, huge climactic scene. This is just a scene that could very well take place kind of in the middle of the book, maybe at a particularly, inconsequential moment. It doesn't have to be the big climax of the story, although that could work as well. But sometimes it's nice when you can see how the magic gets applied to these somewhat smaller, littler scenes within a story, because if it can create something that had me really leaning forward and engaged, like that example just did then, at a smaller scale, at something with less stakes, then it's only going to be more and more interesting as the stakes increase throughout the narrative.
So as the lay becomes less stable and less governed by the old rules of its imperial masters, many people, including somebody who becomes a new cult leader, become capable of things that previously were not possible through the lay. And this cult leader performs a number of miracles through these new and unpredictable powers of the lay. And as he attracts a greater following, he draws more of the power of the lay to itself, and the empire increasingly loses it.
So we've got this sense here of the empire beginning to feel threatened and perhaps on the brink of collapse.
And so they go to him with a test. They want him to fulfill an old prophecy by seizing hold of this subterranean river that runs underneath a bunch of the great cities of the land and wrenching it up. And he attempts to do this with their help, but because of the unpredictability of his new powers, this fails. And as a consequence, other leaders within his movement start to take control and put him in a subservient position to theirs, even as the empire is strengthened in its position.
Often when we think about, cool scenes with magic, we often think about the magic being successful or pulling off this really impressive and majestic and sometimes huge feat. But this scene here by Will is quite interesting because it's a failed use of the magic, but it feeds into the wider story and the plot and the character arcs in a way that seems quite compelling.
My protagonist is an omnilacrim, which is an extremely rare condition, allowing one to produce all the colors, but at the cost of the amounts being significantly smaller than those from people who can produce 2 or 3 colors.
I like that idea of someone maybe having more versatility, but less total power.
So my protagonist finds herself in a situation where she is facing this godlike titan creature who she really can't kill, and she also needs to extract a certain information from the creature, and the creature is not willing to give the information. So she devises a radical plan because she doesn't have that much blue.
So this is cool, doesn't have enough power to pull off the function that she's going for, so it's going to need to improvise. Always love that from a magic system.
So she uses the yellow that she has in a large quantity to stop time, and she uses last drops of red and blue that she has to create a pet. And she befriends that pet, she names it, she, prolongs the time without time to become a really good friends with that pet. And in the end, she lets the Titan kill the pet so that it provides her with the shock needed and the sadness needed to produce the blue color, because blue color is produced through sadness.
That's really cool. So the character intentionally sets up something for herself that she knows is going to traumatize herself and really kind of damage her psychically in order to be sad enough to produce this level of emotion that's required for this power to work. I really like that because if you can make the character kind of sad enough for that power to happen, then that serves a really important narrative function as well, where hopefully that's going to produce a lot of emotions within readers too, and really feel like it's this big moment with a tremendous amount of consequences.
And then she uses the blue color to convince or to control the Titan to give her the information.
Okay, now for the hardest part of this video. I've watched through the scenes from all of our 8 riders, and now I'm going to be evaluating everything I know about their magic systems, looking across their 15-second pitches, their 90-second pitches, and their scenes to decide who is going to win the $1,000 prize and the 1-hour coaching session with myself. Before I get to that, I want to just thank all of you who sent in your magic systems for this. I know there were some tech issues, so some of you might have struggled to send your submissions in, and maybe the submissions didn't go properly, but to everyone who attempted to send in their magic systems and to all of the writers who I've featured in this video, I really appreciate it. It's been hugely inspiring to see all your different concepts, and I, for one, feel very creatively energized by just seeing the raw amount of ideas and uniqueness and creativity that's out there. And I hope that watching this video has produced that same result for you as well. Now, having said all of that, it is time to pick the winner. And I'm going to start by announcing the 3rd place recipient. And that is... And in 3rd place, we have Owen with card sealing magic, where you can kill creatures or humans and then trap them within cards to summon for your will. And what really stood out to me about this entry was the creative ways that he proposed using it. And in particular, the way that he suggested in his scene pitch, where it would essentially turn into this kind of murder mystery story where the murdered victim would actually play a prominent role within the story, haunting these other characters because their card is being controlled by the person who killed them. Then in 2nd place, we have Jan with Lacrimaturgy. Such a cool concept for a black and white world where you cry color, and I particularly loved in his scene pitch where he described a method where a character basically intentionally got themselves really attached to a creature only for the antagonist to later kill it, so that the protagonist would cry enough to generate sufficient power to overcome this foe. And that means in 1st place, we have Ethan. You have won the contest.
Oh my, okay. That's amazing. Wow, thank you.
Well deserved, man.
Well, I'm very happy to hear that. I'm pretty proud of the idea that I've come up with. I've been mulling on this for quite a while, and so I'm glad that it's shown some merit for you.
On the surface, this is quite a simple idea that your heartbeat's frequency impacts the powers you can exert over other people, but I love the interplay that we have here and the fact that you can literally have a whole society of people who all are going to have their heartbeats operating at different frequencies, and the interplay between them all is affecting the magic and affecting their sort of personalities and outlooks on the world. If you enjoyed this video, you might like this one over here where I share 18 ways to write unique magic systems in your fantasy novel. Cheers, and I'll see you in the next video. Keep writing and keep striving.